Ask everyone to make sure their phones are off. Because nothing worse than a horrible noise coming in, or off or on silent.
I'll do that.
Thank you.
Is that all acrylics?
Pardon me?
Is that all acrylics?
Look, so this Margaret Tuxton here is an oil painting. And our basic job is to make painting look as fresh and as joyful as possible. So some of it will be about discussing how to make acrylic look, you know, its full self. So just tell me when, sir.
No, we're on.
Live
Are
stream.
you going to introduce him, David?
Well, yes,
Yes.
after all this.
Considering.
So we've got, may I introduce, we're so excited to have Michael Herron here. Michael?
G'day, how are you?
G'day, I'm David. I'm the
G'day,
salesman here.
Nice to meet you.
We've rolled on in after driving down the 5.
At great speed, actually, I should say.
Yes. We'll cover all the fines at that.
That's exactly right.
So let me try from memory. Michael has been painting for 26 years, would that be correct?
Actually, a little bit more now, but
More
yes,
than that.
I have to review
and
that
probably
CV.
drawing for even longer, because we all draw from birth just about.
Yep, that's
Teaching
right.
for 16?
I know.
Probably
It's 95, whatever that is. Yeah, 1995.
16 years ago.
Yes, and left college 88, so that was 84 to 88, and those years go kind of, you know, fairly fast. You know, travelled overseas, painted in studios overseas, travelled for 2.5 years and painted
in the Blue Mountains at the moment?
Yeah, I've landed in the Blue Mountains. If you have to land somewhere on the earth, it's not a bad place to live, and there's quite a lot of artists up there, and it's quite a nice place to have a studio. I get lyrebirds coming to the studio. It's actually not terrible. You know,
exhibition on at the Blue
yeah,
Gardens?
that's right. Yeah, I'm painting the Everglades with Leo Robber, Rep Brewer, Tim Allen, and myself. So we're invited by the National Trust to paint the garden. So it's quite an exciting little aside. So it's, you know, been good fun. That's on the 13th of October through to the 28th. Tim and I are showing together, and Leo and Rhett are on now, and we have a week in the middle where we're all together as the Lura Open Garden Festival. A different crowd, people that, you know, come in and go, wow, you didn't quite get the, you know, kind of flowers right, did you? You know, it's not quite the exact azalea colour, and it's like, thank you.
Fantastic. And our fantastic model today is going to be Nick, is that right?
It is.
Nick Vickers.
Thank you.
Come on, pick you up.
Okay. Good to meet you.
Lovely to meet you. See you again. Yes.
Michael.
G'day.
Hello, how are you going?
Well, thank you.
Good. So I'll leave it to you two gentlemen to...
So the reason we're here is that I had a little conversation with Nick a little while ago, and I asked him whether he'd sit for my portrait for the Archibald. And so a little bit of meeting has happened, and a little bit of talking has happened, a couple of emails and a few phone calls. And I've drawn Nick a few times, and we have some results, and there are yet more to go. So we're still in the preliminary phase, and I'm still working out what I want to do, basically. But I thought it was a really good opportunity to actually sort of talk about some of actually what I do. And obviously, so, you know, we can actually all paint a picture, is actually go through with some of just, you know, basically how you start, some of the materials, and some of the methodologies that kind of make it a little easier to, you know, paint pictures there and then on the spot. Partly the problem is that we're in fact an Archibald dominated by photos and large heads. I mean, you know, big, aren't they? Some of them are like 7 by 8 feet, or what was that, 2.5 metres. You know, they're big photographic projections. They look like it anyway, and enormous. Some of them, you know, not obviously, but it's an exciting process to still sit somebody in kind of front of you and draw and, you know, paint.
Especially when the Archibald.
Well, look, we don't often put stuff into the Archibald. It's not every painting's sort of, you know, trajectory, or every, you know, portrait you do. But look, the pleasure of it, it's just, what would you say, food for the soul to actually be able to draw and, you know, paint, and it's a good thing to have, you know, that experience. So look, one of the things you can do, obviously, is draw and make all your, how would you say, all your mistakes, all your gains, all your achievements on the drawing, and transpose those ideas from that drawing through to the painting. And obviously forays into painting occur, and it's not always that you make the best painting or the best drawing, but it's the brain's trust of actually having a body of work, several works that build up to you being able to understand exactly what it is you're dealing with. The facial architecture is often different on or every time you see somebody, it's like you notice something different, and that's a very good thing to have under your belt, is to not just have it all pinned on one experience, you know. The 30 minutes of, yeah, that was quite exciting. Actually, the next time you see it, I didn't notice that. Now that you say that.
That's right.
But the more time you have, the more you see, you know, someone articulate, and you see their sort of face moving, and you can see things, and you can move around and start understanding exactly what it is you're seeing. So what's quite good about you know, painting pictures is that you can use materials. Each type of material has a different sort of set of eyes. So as you use your gel mediums and those sorts of things that increase your impasto or thickness, it just looks different. It just has a different, you know, kind of feel to it. So some of the ideas for me are just to try out different materials and see what happens, and actually just see what they see on our actual sitter. Other things that are important to me are what I paint on. So you might notice that my background is, in this case, quite bright orange. And in these cases here, I've placed down an orange and then a very light blue. So they're those background paints. And those background paints provide us, and you know, the main thing people would do would actually just sort of put a single colour on a background. It's actually a lot more interesting if you just put 3 or 4, you know, sort of layers on and actually make it kind of complicated or a little bit more interesting. So we all want to rush basically to the interesting part, but if we put a little bit, you know, kind of more effort into what we paint on, actually it starts getting more interesting and a little easier too. The results start being a little bit, you know, kind of more exciting. So in this case, I'm going to put a painting onto a fairly thick, you know, sheet of you know, watercolour paper. That's 425 GSM, you know, paper, and I like this result. It's a faster mark. You know, these are linen, and they have a different mark to them again. And again, it's that sort of thing. If you mix up your materials, you start seeing different things. You notice different things. So again, these are for me preliminary and preparatory. This painting of you know, Margaret Tuxton, oil painting from a couple of years ago. But again, you can see some of that sort of architecture we were talking about. You know, brush marks describe things really well, and that's why that sort of idea of impasto is quite nice, because it starts having a nice kind of architectural sort of you know, plane or idea versus the background that's then in this case quite, you know, quite kind of washy. In other words, the two together make quite a nice kind of impact. Now, how should we do this? Because I want you to sit down, and I want, yeah, and I want to, you know, sort of go through some of the ideas we're, you know, sort of speaking about here. Look, sometimes the idea is just to do the drawing, and you can see here positioning of the hands. Might not have got it right that time, so your drawing is occasionally where you make all your mistakes and fix them. You don't try and make your drawing be everything. What's also quite nice is that you can transfer this drawing easily through to the canvas. The low-tech version, or what you say, the straight-up version, is to put your piece of tracing paper on here, draw, or you know, outline that, then put onto the back of that tracing paper charcoal everywhere, and then put that onto your canvas and push that drawing through again. I can't tell you, that's such an old technique. That sort of way of getting your, what was called a cartoon up onto your fresco is absolutely stock in, you know, trade of actually how you do it. So tracing paper is a nice sort of, I guess, you know, modern version of the same, but it wouldn't have been far off that. In a previous time, they might have put little holes everywhere and, you know, push the charcoal through the holes. But it's that kind of story. So I guess if you can, you should. You know, it's a good thing to have this drawing not be the thing you paint over. So what we don't want to do is do the best drawing we've ever done and then, you know, happily paint over that exact, you know, drawing and then lose all your information. So we're trying to sort of get that information kept and, like, you know, actually, and I might be able to even transfer this drawing to another piece of paper and kind of work up the likeness to exactly, you know, the likeness. Shall we have a little look at that?
So you're going to show us how you transfer that onto your... Oh, great.
So look, my getting that on the mic. Sorry about that. It's a professional outfit. So you can see that this transparency, we can get quite a bit of information through there. And my piece of charcoal. So it could be a pencil mark, but you can see that this sort of... So it's within reason, sort of fairly broad. But what I'm interested in is that you can... Excuse me, I have to turn my back to the audience. they tell you in teaching school never do that, don't they? You can't turn your... Sorry, everybody. So just whilst I... And I should say out, forgive me for the sins I commit, because I might not get it exactly right.
That's all right.
We're trying. There's a bit of eyebrow action there. I kind of notice. I probably shouldn't exaggerate, but that may happen. Maybe the case. So our drawing itself, and this is just a compressed charcoal. It could be absolutely anything, honestly. It's just, in this case, just trying to get the idea through so that when we actually draw, and if I put as much, if this took ages and I got as much effort onto this as possible, or as much kind of, how would you say it? That I paid a lot of attention to this stage of it. The nice part for us is that we can place that down there. Nice bit of willow charcoal. Everybody should have a bag of willow charcoal. I need to go, actually I'll turn this around, otherwise I'll push the reverse side onto that. So this can be applied for everything, anything you do, but basically so this way of transferring things means that you can keep the drawing and do this. So we've got our drawing on that side, pardon me. We have our charcoal on this side. If we turn, and we've got it there as well, that's all true. No, it's a good thing. But it's the simple, and if anybody knows where that bulldog clip went, that will be, of course. Doesn't matter. So if I now push this through, really, I'm going to tape that up there. No, I've got some tape here. I'm just going to steal some tape from here. I have extra. There we are. Look at that. Thank you. Okay, so this then means I can push it through with this, even the stub of my brush. It really doesn't matter as long as it's pushed through. The idea of actually pushing it through with something that draws means you know where you've drawn. So there's this kind of idea for me of actually just explaining, and I'm sorry this stuff's so crinkly. But the idea is that we can transfer all of that information, and this is just the simplest way through it, like so. Must review those eyebrows, Nick. I'm probably exaggerating something there, or
you probably need to.
Yeah, it's possible. Yeah, I think there might be a case for.
You don't want to end up with a case.
No, exactly right. That may happen.
We'll see.
We'll see. The other joy, of course, is that we need to, once we've got our sort of story up there on the board, we need to obviously put in all the rest of it. But from my point of view, look, you can see these sorts of support material. You would have 3 or 4 paintings up on any one time. You'd have all the information you've gained up in the studio when you're going for it, as it were, and trying to understand your figure from every source possible. What I notice is when people have something, they get the drawing up there, throw that away, never see it again, and then start kind of painting it. It's a bit kind of you're flying blind a little bit. So if we can, Thank you very much. If we can, I'm...
I have to be something like a still life now, don't I?
I won't go there. Stiller than normal. All right. So with this just rudimentary transference of that drawing, what we get is this sort of idea where we can get something up on the board. And if I can just get you to just come around just a fraction more. Nice. That my drawing is so Willow Charcoal is the preferred story here. What we're after is something that you can easily wipe. And if I can say it that way, when you see charcoal like this, it'll just brush off. You don't want to go near pencils, in other words. Be really careful not to use, graphite. It's one of the slipperier things ever made, and in other words, you're not going to get that off your board, or nothing's going to stick to it. More to the point. So, as soon as we have these sorts of beginnings, we stand back. The problem again is we often draw most of our information and paint most of our information from this distance, whereas you can't tell what you're doing, you haven't got an overview. So it's much easier, so just forgive me here, Nick. It's much easier if we draw this, stand back and review our story. And look, the joy, of course, of getting anything like this started is, it takes a bit of time. This is the, place to put a bit of time. And usually we want to rush to the exciting part. It's good to spend some time at this point. Okay. So I've got to composite a little bit of the drawing that I had here, and obviously Nick sitting there. It's an interesting little meld of the story, but we can... Thank you. So look, just generally, charcoal, messy substance that it is, charcoal is great because you can move it around, and as we spoke before, all the mistakes can happen here. All the, what would you say, the way of, the exploration, exactly right, can be fixed and made here. So look, it's a place where you put a bit of energy, and if you've done your drawing, it's obvious. I'm trying not to wipe charcoal all over myself as well. Look like Alice Cooper, it could be. But this sort of paper though, this orange, what's really nice about having a background colour, it comes through everywhere. Also too, what you start finding is it unifies your painting. So it comes through all over the place. Where you have something like a scumbled mark, a broken stroke, you can see through into it. And that's quite a good place to actually sort of start your story. If you start on white, actually fractionally harder and a bit longer, just simply out of the idea that everything's darker than white. So what you put on, you tend to end up with a chalky painting. A lot more white involved. So this sort of orange, it's a lot more of your mid-tone, and you start seeing it a little quicker. Look, it's good to imagine, and when we do our drawing, it's good to imagine that everything is in a three-dimensional story, so we can sort of see through things. It's nice to think that our neck is a nice cylinder, and that our jersey in this case is going around the back and comes out this side here. Again, it's just in your imagining. Your charcoal's the place where you start to really imagine, the sculptural aspects of your drawing, of your subject, I should say. What you're trying to do is not obviously have a flat a flat story, and I'll be kind. So these drawings are, a slightly more considered time. Basically, where you can really put a lot of energy into getting your likeness, and if most of it could be spoken about, like this, your painting basically, kind of is on the bones of the drawing. If your drawing's not there, then your painting's a bit kind of difficult. Can I do some painting? Is that possible? I just need to probably move myself around a fraction. Just simply, I'm a kind of right-hander. Just a simple thing. If I'm painting my picture here, you don't want to be looking over your arm for the entirety of your drawing. It's better to have your subject here and your easel there. So it could be just a nice thing if we swap around fractionally, just to put you there and me there, and that would be a little bit easier for everything. I think for everybody. Get to see our subject.
Shall I move this off the floor?
Thank you. Yes, I'm about to put black fingerprints over everything I have. Okay, not okay.
I'll put it over here.
Thank you. Are we having a context problem now? Yep. I just know it's going to be far easier for everybody if we do it that way. Yeah, that's good. All right. I don't know. I really hope so.
You're going pretty well.
Yeah. Or towards you. How's that? Okay.
Seated?
Yes, thank you. Just making sure I don't. Am I still live streaming? Thank you. Thank you. No, the benefits of being live to air with your charcoal hands. That's right. Now, if any tip I have too about buying paint is buy the jumbo size of white. You will use white far beyond anything else. It's just amazing. Like I just can't tell you. Buy a big container. It's all good. It's all good. Art is slightly messy business, as you would understand. And
Why don't you go and wash your hands over there?
probably, look.
And I'll talk
And your model can talk about it.
I can talk about what it's like to be a model, which is kind of a bit unusual because you sort of, like I said, you don't want to be a still life. You want to actually sort of inject, you want the artist to be able to inject a little bit of life into this kind of sad old body, and a little bit of expression. So you've got to kind of work with the artist. I think that one of the worst things that you can get is a model who is vain, because vanity and art don't really go very well together. You sort of ask for a little nip and tuck, or a little colour, a little bit more dark hair, and you've got to kind of leave yourself open to the artist. I mean, that's the whole kind of. There has to be some truth in it, and you hope that the artist will have that ability to kind of capture your soul. James Joyce, when he was having his portrait painted, there's a beautiful image of him, and it's sort of him with a nice tie, and he's talking to the artist, and he said, "I don't care how you paint my soul, just get the tie straight." So I kind of think, well, that's okay. If I'm going to be if I'm going to be the model, you have to trust these guys and sort of say, okay, what you see is, you know, not what we see. When I sort of, you know, see myself in the mirror in the morning, sort of, you know, shave and I look as best as I possibly can, and I then face the world, but everyone else sees you in a totally different light. So, yeah. So it's a matter of trust, but I mean, you know, I'm very happy with, very honoured in a way to be invited to, you know, to sit for a portrait. So this is, you know, it's not the first time, but it's certainly, I mean, I think that one of the nice things is that I did train as an artist before I went into the business of sort of running galleries and managing art collections. So that, I mean, I did have sort of 6 years training and then realised in 1987 that I actually wasn't an artist. Didn't have that ability. And I did actually discover that at that time I was setting up galleries and finding that I was getting a lot of satisfaction out of that. You know, so, you know, I think that the artists are a brave group of people. They get out there and sort of, you know, do what they need to do. It's a tough life, but very rewarding as well, because you end up with a portrait like that one, which I think is a very fine drawing actually. I haven't seen it until today, so I sort of, well, it does kind of give you that sort of trust in the artist as well. You look at it and you say, oh yeah, look a little bit like that person. You know?
I had the joy of drawing Nick in his office. Like I'm just, you know,
That's right.
fast and furious. See ya, gotta go.
No, that was done in, 2 of those were done in about an hour and a half. Which is pretty good. Yeah. We ready?
We are.
That's it. Okay.
Come up
that's
for
it me.
Come up for a breather.
Okay.
Okay. The best way to describe most of our painting, you know, life is that we have a bit of an engine room, our, you know, palette, and we need to really, you know, use it, you know, kind of well and actually have some idea and organisation. If anything, you know, most of us fall a little bit sort of, you know, short on the, you know, palette use, and by that I mean we're not using it tonally, and we don't use it in a way that can be kind of, what would you like, streamlined. So if I can say it this way, that our in this case it's quite a transparent piece of plastic, but you can see this kind of tonal idea of skin is kind of interesting, and if we mix those together, my white's on the end there, but you can see these kinds of tones that can kind of happen through those two things together. Now, the point being is that it's easier to see where you are. Once you start down here and go up that way, it's easier to see where you're up to. And if we just use spots here or whatever, then that's a bit kind of random as to what you've just done. So if you can, with any of your story, try and make a gradation. Try and, you know, start from the, you know, the dark end, you know, and that's your, in this case, burnt sienna with a little bit of blue perhaps, you know, next, and a bit of kind of red maybe, you know, one of the reds, all the way up through to this unbleached titanium. And then when you start putting your, you know, white in, your whites at the end, there's not much really out on our, you know, face, etc., but there's enough. So we want to have valued our actual highest white tone, and by that I mean we don't want to basically make the mistake of having kabuki people with lots of too much white, you know, as a way of thinking. The other thing I'd say would be that our gel medium, these are fantastic in terms of making your paint have a nice bulk and a nice presence to them. If anything, they will dry flatter than you actually want, unless you add, you know, like this. The other thing I'd suggest would be to actually put something that slows down the drying as well. So that drying retarder is a nice way to actually sort of see your painting material, and my palette's not exactly level. So the issue is for us that we want to have a medium, a rather large amount of medium, in this case a nice big, you know, palette knife, and have mixed up our gradation so that we've got quite a lot of, and I'm just going to put out...
So the medium, that dries clear, doesn't it?
Dries clear. It just basically bulks the paint out, and of course changes the idea of it. It becomes a little bit more either fluid or a little bit more structured. Or so if I add, and I'm just a bit wary that my medium's going to drip off my palette there, but if I add my blue and red together with my sienna, there's really not much out there. Maybe we're looking at eye pupils, etc. But you can see that we've got a nice sort of rich gradation there. All of which means that we want to have that alive at the same time. Do you understand? So we can actually paint from it. So it's good to make up lots of the stuff too. You don't want to make up that fantastic spot, that's the right colour, and then it's gone in a brush stroke and you can't get it again. Oops, that's a minor disaster too. So look, I'm just going to use my palette knife and I'm just going to mix some of this lovely gel medium into here and make up a nice big gradation. Let's just sort of see what goes on there, so that our paint itself becomes a nice kind of tonal story, and you can see that white just going in at the end there. So this is the basic model. In other words, when we see this sort of story, it's just tone, nice warm gradation. What we want to think though is that actually we have cools, we have other warms, we start to add things when we get a bit more, sure of what we're up to structurally, our actual face looks a bit like the person we're after. And then you start making kind of warmer claims for the nose, etc. coming forward, and cooler ears and cooler neck and that sort of thing. So just a little idea. We sort of dome forward with a nice kind of warm story. There's more contrast out the front, there's warmer tones, more clarity versus less contrast, less clarity, etc. If you have your ears being too strong, too much contrast, then they bump forward in a strange way. Or the opposite version is having your, and I won't touch my nose, but you have a flat nose against your face. There's no lift off. So the point being is that we've got to have that, we've got to maintain the natural order we see. Okay, let's have a look. So, the first, did I change that too much, sir? The first thing we want to do is not lose our drawing. Do you understand? So the drawing is the important part of this story, and we want to be really quite focused on it not being lost through painting across the top of it, which means that we just ever slow, thank you, yes, thank you, so that we've got our degree of kind of a longer brush. We hold it so that thing's kind of wedged in there, so we're as far back as possible. You don't want to get in here and make sure no one can see it. It's all good to actually be able to stand back a little bit. And that medium wet out so it's a bit quite kind of fluid. And again, we're just really after So this obvious drawing we've got up here is also married with our observation. It's the starting point. We shouldn't be able to, only be guided by this. So again, Nick, I'm sorry for any of the sins I commit with my observational drawing and painting of you. We try.
Well, from here I don't even get to see it.
Well, that's right, exactly. That's.
I've got a screen up there.
Just back a bit further. Yep, sorry. So there's a little bit of this kind of drawing of the structural story, as well as sort of reaffirming the drawing we went through with before. In other words, we're trying to capture what is a tonal pattern, just that dark and light. And if we just get down that drawing, plus a little bit more, it's actually quite close to that tonal, the darks that we can sort of see. We only need that structural core, as it were, on top of which we can start to paint our lighter stuff. So lots of light paint, as you see, with our palette, but we need this structure to work. And look, if we were, here for hours or days, this part of it also too is quite, you want to spend time here. Don't, rush past this bit. This is what it all sits on. So look, some of this is obviously a brush. It's a drawn mark. And there's some degree of wanting our tone as well. So we're basically putting down, as you see, the darks first, as it were, thinned out as much as possible so that they're a nice fluid mark, and spending, a little bit of time here. I'd probably at this point too do this. I'd probably put down my our other parts of the drawing, and in this case our and it is interesting, if we get this tone right, by that I mean if we start getting down some of that, what's there in terms of how dark can get. It is interesting what you start noticing. Dark, if we put down one parameter we know, in other words the darkest thing we have, then everything else starts looking a little lighter. You can start to count back from that point. So if he's, in this case, t-shirts dark, then we know everything. There's a couple of moments out there that are in fact anywhere near as dark as that. Maybe behind on the collar there, perhaps, underneath the collar or something. And it means that everything becomes, or is lighter than that moment. So it's good for us to actually have something of that. We start knowing something. Do you understand? If we just fly a little blind by putting down random, areas, we're none the wiser until we fill the whole thing in, and then it's like, actually, once we've stood back, you think, I don't know. In other words, it's just too long. It's just longer. I shouldn't say it's too long. It's just inefficient. Okay, so if we get down this drawing, and I spend a little bit more time here, just placing on a little bit of this. This brush is reasonably small, and it is a reasonable drawing brush.
What colour are you using?
This is the darkest, section, the burnt sienna, a bit of phthalo blue. Makes a nice kind of, it's a nice dark. But look, there's not much out there that's really necessary to have a strong dark on, but what I'm just going to do is pop those eyes on and a little bit more of the tone and the colour. And then just like that. So we'll just go down that path for a second. Okay, the other thing I should say is the biggest brush you can possibly wield is the one you should use. So once this drawing is up and running, then we basically defer to the biggest brush we own, or the biggest brush we can find in our kit. And it can be a minor disaster, but if I said to you, okay, look, you've forgotten everything today, I'm sorry, but this is the only brush I can allow you to use. Actually, it's fantastic. What you've got to do next is quite fun, because you've got to actually start to make things plainer and a little bit simpler. It's a bit thankful, actually. So these brushes are really where you start finishing, but they're a good drawing brush to start with. Okay.
So you don't worry about the charcoal mixing with the paint? Doesn't matter.
No, and look, if we went down that path again, we'd just brush it off. But look, honestly, it's so small. It could be, if it was an issue, if you had a delicate light thing, painting-wise, that might be an issue to get rid of. Okay, so these bigger brushed stories, you can see that sort of size of brush mark. means for us as painters quite nice planal information. So what I quite like is that we've started, let's have a look, about there. It's probably the better tone to start with. And we really spend some time and quietly, I shouldn't say going too fast, there's not so much bravado going on, but we really want to start with this kind of slightly darker story. Hopefully, if all goes to plan, we don't have to keep washing this all the time or washing it too much. We're just basically building through these tones slowly. And look, this amount of sienna, if you drop a little bit of your red into it, you can start seeing you've got slightly warmer tones. But our joy at this time is just to find that tone everywhere and really trying to connect all those tones together. At this point, you'd be probably better off standing back and trying to really get this to be, like, honestly, a drawing. Almost, so you're really trying to correct its drawing. For me, in a slight time factor, I'm just going to go quickly at this somewhere. So this sideways, it's interesting when you see what information is. The thought would be if you see a line, you draw a line like that, but it's actually quite nice to put on that information in its side story. Let's just have a look at the nose as a and you can see perhaps that if we just touch this right at the end, that light should sit right up on top. So what I'm going to do is just leave that tone till the end, and I'm just going to go back and work through all these other bits and pieces. But it's the idea of putting down our darks first, which through to the lights, which I think is quite a nice way to work. So I'm just going to put down a little bit more of that earlier tone. Any questions while we're at this phase?
What red is it?
That's the burnt sienna, which I quite like, and there's just a spectrum red or I try not look. There's a Matisse light red. I try really to stay away from cadmiums if I can, So, I mean, lovely as they are, I paint with the stuff all the time. It's like, otherwise I'd be wearing gloves and we'd all be a little bit more careful. Sort of painting a little bit in reverse, Nick. If I could get you just fractionally further that way around, that'd be great. Thank you. So that we wish to really just build up this story a little slowly, perhaps. In other words, we're just looking at all good?
Yeah,
Is that good? I was going to ask you. It doesn't sound so great. How you going, Nick?
I'm going okay.
So that by just blocking in this stuff and covering as much as you can, as quickly as you can, I'd sort of like to get to that stage pretty soon into the painting before I go back to that slightly smaller brush. But basically trying to flesh out the idea of the painting, the planes of which are quite kind of interesting to really just take on some of that sort of information. The other part, look, too, if we got our really big brush, and I'll just make up a little bit of this. Thanks, Nick, you can be a little relaxed for a second. If you want to go crazy, you know.
How's it looking?
I'll just sort of block stuff in. So it really doesn't know, it's no drama to actually, what would you say, block in other areas of your painting as well. And I'd suggest that if it's easy enough to do, to put down some information for your shirt or the background, simply so you've kind of, it's almost like the morale of your paintings is a bit important. You need to see things happening. You get a bit kind of bogged down. So look, it's fair game to say that our figures are probably mainly, how would you say it, the personalities around the eyes, probably mainly getting that sort of thing. So you want to spend all your time there. That's kind of where you spend a lot more of your time anyway. So these other areas then are much more kind of your blocked on sort of story. That's not quite the right colour I was after. So these sorts of things mean that you can either put it on with your palette knife like so, or get the even bigger brush. Just washing that. Glad I washed my hands before. And really kind of block in as much as you can. So look, I'll just get a slightly gel medium mix, thicker mix. Okay, let's just have a look at your... Okay, I'm just going to use a slightly smaller brush. Yeah, and just basically push in. So don't be afraid, these brush marks are all kind of all about kind of us sort of keeping some of that freshness of the drawing. You want your basic kind of information to be the face, and you want this stuff to be reasonably kind of uninteresting. Reasonably kind of, it's there, it's structural, but it's not kind of... Otherwise, we end up with the best shirt that overpowers the painting. You don't want that kind of too much to happen. So I'll just be with you, Nick, in a second. You can spend days looking for your alizarin, crimson, and then one day there it is. It's staring at you in the face. That's right. Okay. Okay. So if we put down some of this stuff, so you can see some of these marks, especially anything to do with, anything to do with material is very angular and therefore much more painted from your shoulder. So there's a mark. If you're up there, you're painting. I've just put paint on my shoulder. I'm sorry about that. It's a joy, isn't it? So there's a much more sort of, some of these sorts of marks are much more, as you see, your arm is much more kind of rigid and you're just placing on. It's happened before. So any of these brush marks, they're really just functional, aren't they? They're really just serving to planalise stories. As I said, this could come from the palette knife very easily, or it could come easily from, as you see, one of these larger brushes, or in fact the biggest brush. In today's episode, this is going on quite nicely. And maybe you can see that orange coming through is quite an effective kind of way of. So again, these marks are drawn on, but they're drawn on much more from your brush held like so, and much more kind of from the shoulder, as we spoke, all of which is to say it becomes much more articulate or angular in a nice material sort of fashion. Okay. Now, where were we? So, as soon as we start to get a little closer to, we've blocked in, we start to look at our portrait being a little bit more about Nick, a bit more about the sort of the exact nature of what we're seeing. We see the brush maybe gets a little smaller and we start to look a little closer, and you notice the brush is held somewhere else. You know, it's held right up close, and we start having a little bit of a stand back. And I would really, you know, at this point, I should say, really stand back as far as I could and try and understand the overall. The problem is we think we're heroes when we stand up really, you know, like too, you know, close for too long. You think, fantastic, this is great, gee, I'm doing well today, this is wonderful. And then you stand back and think, what was I thinking? So it is quite nice for us to, you know, meditate a bit on this story. We just want to be able to see our figure as shape and as drawing, and then once we've gone past a certain point, just step back and really sort of see if there's, you know, what it is we're seeing. Often though, as we spoke, it's just about often it's just about the, you know, the personality is just about the eye area, very often anyway. Shape of the eyes. Just come back around further again. Thank you. Thank you. So again, these brushes are never, you know, really held up, you know, close. They're often there. Again, so you're letting the brush do the speaking. And again, we can let our So I'm putting just a little bit more down there, and they're slightly cooler. It is interesting. Underneath here, cool. Up here, nice and warm. If we get that, you know, kind of wrong, or there's too much contrast down on your neck, effectively you give your sitter a goiter that's just this bulge that just comes out. It's distressing, to tell you the truth. They're a bit like the big ears. It's a bit like wrong. So we try to keep that kind of cooler and underneath, so that our highlights, and we're building up to putting on some highlights, our highlights are all up here. Generally put, the highlights are on the points of articulation, where the bone gets close to the skin. You know, top of the skull, top of the nose, cheekbones, etc. All those bits that stick out. And it's amazing when you see the skull how actually big those, you know, kind of bones are, and that we don't see more of them. They're actually, you know, it's, you know, where the skin starts to be a little sort of stretched. Just generally, that's where you start to see your brighter highlights. So for us, we're seeing them up here. You can see what bright is. Sorry. Bright is bright, and we're after that in a second, but not quite yet. So that our brights themselves we're building up to. So that our brighter moments will be quite exciting to the eye once we get there. And look, other parts that are kind of interesting for us is that these brushes, all your brushes, have a couple of marks on them too. They have that mark that comes out of the end, nice sort of directional articulate mark. If we swing that around though, our brush has quite an interesting mark when it comes off the side, and it kind of mixes almost on the canvas. The point is that you can make texture quite interestingly. So for us as painters, we're, you know, kind of aware of what it is we're trying to describe, of course. Hair, for example, shirts, backgrounds, all those things that make us, or, you know, make the painting kind of interesting. Pardon me. Just remove my shirt. Put that down there. Also, I guess you'd say too, the bigger the palette, the easier the painting. People turn up to class often. They've got a couple of plastic plates, or they've got the smallest, you know, thing, you know, possible. Disastrous almost. Like, it's really hard. So the bigger the palette, even double this size would be good. Like, just as big as you can, you know, would actually really help. The other point would be too, you want to be kind to your sitter, generally. And by that I mean you don't want to go too much on this kind of roundness around our eyes. You want to try and be quite a little bit kind of, what would you say, thoughtful that around your eyes it's pretty much all vertical marks. If you go against that story, you start making lots of these marks. I can't describe it, but if you do that, you start adding a lot of time to someone's face. Like, it's a disaster, because then they don't like you, and they don't want to pay for the portrait. Generally,
Am I paying for this portrait?
You're not paying for this portrait. Did we discuss portrait payment?
Oh.
That's right, Nick. I've been holding off on you all this time.
This is that Friday afternoon surprise. You know? Just, your money's just gone in the bank, the end of the working week, you know, and then the artist comes along and says,
By the way,
oh, by the way.
now that I've, you know, got you. So yes, try not to do that aroundness of someone, or there's a, I'm sure he's an American comedian that looks about, you know, a lot older, because he's got lots of bags, and seem to always draw him as if there's ever expanding kind of onion ring eyes around his. A good point to make is that the whites of our eyes are rarely white. And when you do see them as being white, they look a bit like the dolphin room in Mycenae. You know, it's a bit kind of surprised model look. So we try not to do that. But the colour that they are is kind of an interesting conversation too, because well, if they're not that, what are they? It's usually quite a pearl colour. You know, it's quite an adding of the blue and your red together. And it's quite a similar skin colour. Occasionally, yes, it does get brighter, but try not to make them too bright. Your best option would be to mix a bit of your blue with your skin colour. Try that out. The other thing would be, and I have a large stick called a mull stick or a painting stick, but if you can put your hand across here, then it's a similar sort of story. And we just want to get, obviously, your eyes going pretty soon. And that wasn't a very smart mark. If you do happen to make an errant mark, as I just did, wiping it off is probably as good as any. All good? How long have we got, may I ask? Can we just, what do you reckon?
10 minutes, or is that so good?
Boom, boom, ba-dum, dum, boom, ba-dum, ba-dum, doo, doo, doo-doo-doo. I'll be as quick as I can.
You can go as
I have no time limit, etc. I mean, apart from not a marathon in the Guinness Book of Records, but it's like
It's 20, well, just for you, it's 20 past 4.
Okay.
So,
So look, it's interesting when you see what blasted in is. You put something down quite kind of roughly. It means your background and your shirt and those sorts of things can go on in a couple of minutes. But you put your time, you base your time on what you obviously in the important part, who he is. Sitter-wise is perhaps eyes. So we're sort of trying to put down some of these things. It is interesting. You can put down the mark. In other words, and then change its direction. So you can put that on and they're quite a nice sort of story. And again, our eyelids, our eyes are like a golf ball, basically. They're quite big and the front part of it gets brighter. Meaning that we see our brightest moments out in front here and we keep going. So our bright, anything bright basically on that level is darks, lighter, lightest and lightest in the middle again. So we try not to be too bright too early, so we just underneath our eyelid of course, but also on top here. And it's interesting, we often think that our sharpest mark's going to come with one of these. But if we look at what a chisel brush can do, that sharp line is really nice. So this mark is important to be able to do, and it's a very sharp, nice thing to be able to, place on, which means when we see these around the bottom rim of the eye, we might have something like this. But it's placed on like so. Now I'm just going to go into that eye colour again. It's something which would take normally 3 or 4 hours, or not as many sittings as Picasso did of poor old Gertrude Stein, 96. She must have had good conversation about her or something. She must have had fantastic conversation. She would have been a funny old dear, I'd suggest. So look, the lights of your eyes, let's get there, are going to go on before your darks, because what you're about to do is do this. We just put those darks in when we first started painting the portrait, just to sit them in there. But basically they're far easier to paint them sort of as a secondary sort of phase. I mean, again, standing back some distance for some time would be possibly preferable, but at this point we'll just place on something. I'm hazarding a bit of a guess, just so we can get this sort of moving a little bit. So sorry if there's some shortcuts. The other thing you should notice too is people's hair is a huge amount of their look, who they are. Point being is when you get a haircut or you have a really radical haircut and your whole head looks different. So actually it's something to pay attention to, what the shape of their hair is. And look, again, this size brush, the small ones come out. It's the one for around the eyes. And the point is that we don't want to bring this out too early. You know, you see people with the sort of thought they're going to do detail today. I'm going to do detail. Da Vinci is going to happen today. And of course, it's just this brush is the first thing they do. It's a slight disaster because it's too slow and you can't match everything up together so quickly, and we're there. So any of these sort of slightly darker marks, and there'll be just a couple in here. And or underneath. Where are you, Nick? So that drawn mark can come back in. I think at the end you'll get a fair chance to get a little bit of drawing to happen as you finish. Just a bit of, as we spoke, a little bit of drawing just to okay. So contrast on your ears or ears themselves might be absolutely, hardly anything. I've got to make up a colour for your hair now. Any suggestions I should?
I pay a fortune to get to find this colour, It's actually jet black.
Got to live while you work, don't you? It's a bit of fun. How's it going? Okay. Oh, it's just. So look, you'll see instead of palette knife use, you'll see me really using this to go across. You don't want to have lots of streaks in your hair colour. God, that was a bad joke. Oh, come on, that was a quality bad joke. That was terrible.
Foils. A bit dark.
Bit dark, I know. Taking years off you.
Well, that's all right.
And again, look, I've got a bit of a darker background here. The point being is that you only have light objects because you've got darker backgrounds. If we were on a very white background, we'd have a much darker, response. So it is interesting once we start putting down these sorts of tones that we're actually sort of counting on the fact that we're going to change the background colour, and I'd be sort of quite keen to put some of those darker tones into the background, a little bit in the way we've seen here with the Margaret Tuxton portrait. Just that there's strong background tone makes the whole portrait sort of come alive a little bit more tonally. So I'd be keen to just sort of brush on some of this stuff, and you see where I'm actually, kind of holding it quite sort of loosely. The smaller brush, will be this kind of mark where it's a lot more, direct. And I look, hair's almost kind of, quite random after the structure of the face, so it's quite nice to have the two together. Did you want to stop for a second? Are you having issues there?
Everything's going crazy.
Too much art.
Don't worry about that displaying.
Okay, I'm sorry. Technical problems abound. We battle on them. Again, any questions while we're... It's a pretty quick, portrait. And it's just, at this point we're sort of more or less having a... I'm just going to...
But you've also got 3 stages of the portrait as well, haven't you?
That's
so you've
right.
got this as the beginning, and this one down here as the, second, and then that one as the third, or the other way around.
That's right. Yeah,
so
looking
you've
on...
got 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah.
So if anything, when you have real time constraints, it's the drawing that sort of suffers. Like you just haven't got the time to get the drawing really up and running. There's nice things about actually having hours and hours and hours. And or if you've got a model that you can sort of see a couple of times and be able to... So did you want to stop altogether, or and rejig it somehow? Or?
I don't know what's wrong with
Okay.
it.
It's decided to have an issue. Look, just try and think too that your brushwork, and some of this brushwork I'm probably not explaining, some of it's about us sort of putting on a directional story. So we could come up along there, go across there, along there, up the nose, across the top of the nose, then down the other side, across there, down there. The planes of this sort of face are able to be, and I've got this tiny brush so you can maybe see it as a line. So these sorts of directional marks are important. And look, I'm just trying to sort of explain that our story can be quite a lot about kind of trying to almost draw with a brush. And that sort of drawn mark is in fact following often quite a lot of this kind of architecture, directional stuff. And look, it isn't bad actually to leave some of those on. I quite like them, it's quite nice. Look, within reason, style can overpower observation, but it's quite nice to actually have... tried a little bit of this stuff, and I quite like the idea of the study being a place where you just experiment like crazy and see what happens. Sorry, back to our hair, where I was getting in trouble. Bad jokes with hair. So we're building up to putting that background on, and I know with those smaller portrait studies I've done, they're what would you say, lighter backgrounds. But I'll try a darker background on this one and see what happens. But look, again, really limited palette. Just simply trying to, see a structure, and obviously, if we have any time, and we can see what. If you had any extra time, it's amazing where you can put warm colours. So, in other words, if we're going to drop some red into somewhere, bright red, it is interesting. We'll get the chance to put some around the front in here. In other words, you can start to warm up a portrait. And it is interesting that that background, bright orange, can live happily poking through as it does. In other words, we start to fill in the gaps, like it's true, you start to, hang on, I didn't do that bit yet. And yet you've been able to leave them because it's quite a nice portrait. It's quite a nice portrait tone underneath, in other words. Sorry, my normal this 10-minute time limit. It's a bit better make a painting. Well, no, you don't often live stream your art wanderings onto the net, you know. Brave as I am, you know.
I can't see it now because the screen is gone.
And look, at this stage, if you were to get something tonally wrong, but in other words, drawing right tonally wrong, so it's all like jumpy tonally or something, you can put a glaze over these things and knock them back. So in other words, it's quite, a lot of the portraits you will know will be using glaze. So they painted this stuff, accurate in detail in all sorts of ways, etc., but awful in terms of, you know, tone, but then they actually, you know, glaze. So there's then, you know, binder mediums and different mediums that you can use for glazing, you know, basically, you know, the binder mediums are, you know, great thing, it's paint without pigment. But if you just use water, then you basically use a solvent in amongst the water, you know, a slight disaster in other words. Okay. See, Nick, I was completely, you know, fortifying myself in case you thought I've made you look too grey, you know.
Well, only bacon, yeah.
Okay. Palette line. How are we going? We still having technical squishes? So is there broadcast or?
Yeah.
Broadcast but no image. So the background colour, the last moment of this painting before, I guess you sort of stand back then and go, what have I just done? You can sort of really see it for the first time. In other words, you know, you make your big and critical assessments of if you've done okay or not once you've filled in everything kind of thing. You don't want to get too upset about what you've just done, you know. In other words, you can be too stressed sort of on the way. Actually, it's probably better to just, you know, hold off your, you know, judgment and see if you've done okay or not. And, you know, I might stand back and go, what was I thinking? But at this point, you know, it's quite nice just to... I'd be just terrible, wouldn't I, as an actor or something on TV. It'd be just like, you know, look at me, don't look at them, don't look at the camera. I'm trying. But look, you know, I think just generally artists have been dragged kicking and screaming out of their, you know, studios, and it's probably good, really. I know, I mean, that was the main thing. I'd not taught at all, and then I got asked to, you know, teach, and I was shocked, you know. I thought I was going to be found out. I mean, you know, you just have this incredible anxiety about telling anybody about art, you know, in some way, because you've been in your studio hermetically sealed for years. And it's actually fantastic. It's good to go out and talk to people about what you do.
I think the difficulty with art school, when you get an art education, you feel that you haven't learnt anything until you actually have to go out and tell somebody else about something, and then you sort of start explaining things, and you surprise yourself because you start thinking, actually, I really did learn something. I really do know some of this stuff.
That's what I was saying. You think you're going to be found out because they're going to ask, you know, a lot of really difficult questions, and yet you realise you've just gone and done a degree and you've been at it for years, and of course, you know, you're actually quite kind of able to, you know, respond. You want to spend time making up the right colour. Did I say that correctly? You want to not make the wrong colour and spread the wrong colour around everywhere. You will do it, in other words. It's quite good to actually spend time here. Okay. Just a little bit of a So look, quite interestingly, so I've made up a dark blue colour and I made up a bit of a mauvey colour, and we'll see if we can get a result. I have no idea. No, I do, of course. It's just I want it to be dark. Thought that'd be quite a... look, usually lots of cloths drying all your things. We haven't got. We haven't got. So again, everything's kind of provisional. You put it on, see what happens. There'd be quite a degree of kind of standing around and looking. There's far more cogitation in art, I reckon, than you'd imagine. In terms of looking and looking and then looking again. It's a lot of decisions. So you put something up there and then throw every art question you can possibly throw at something at it and see if it stands up, see if it still works. And they're kind of quite good kind of conversations to have, because you can really start to understand everything from tonal point of view, or interestingly ideaed point of view, and usually it's what a lot of that staring is from the couch, and see if it works. So these kinds of backgrounds, I'd be kind of keen to,
So do you tend to sort of go lighter on one side of the painting or darker on the other?
Okay, so things to avoid. There are things to avoid with backgrounds. You don't want this background to change colour right above an ear, so you have a tangent above an ear, like in other words, it comes over to there, stop, and then it's yellow. Right there. That's a disaster. And there are a few disasters actually. The centre of the painting is a bit of a disaster for change. But look, these sorts of backgrounds could be easily your palette knife. It's a nice sort of place. Palette knives have a really lovely kind of mark. And again, your differently toned story, and you're right for saying that, Nick, if we blend that across, you might notice with that Margaret Tuxen painting there's body paint like this, as it were, and then there's also glazing going on in the background. So I'll put down thank you. All good? So there might be
So is the idea of putting a dark background to push the face forward?
Yeah, just to get some tone. Look, if it doesn't work and the jury's out, if it's a no-go, in 10 minutes' time it'll be dry and I'll just paint something over the top of it. If it's really not me and you have to have that bigger picture in kind of mind, it might just be a disaster. Mm-hmm. So I'm actually going to do a couple of things here. I'm going to change the background a little bit, but it just not to just one big different colour, but it's what happens if you put something. So look, there's a degree of creativity involved. You can see there's toing and froing. It's not exactly your analytical kind of looking at a nose or an eye, but it's quite a nice place to. And you can see maybe that, and oh, look at that, nice one, that going right down that arm. Oh, what a disaster! You've got to really keep some of those sort of tangents away from your figure, so bring that in, so if it comes to there. So again, I'd be kind of keen just to sort of see how this plays out. I'm having a little bit of a feeling that this mauve is enough. No more, please. I left my glasses in the car.
This is great.
I don't need them for very much, but there's occasional moments when I think, you know, it would be just nice to have them. It's awkward. It is interesting, if you play look, you can play with this background a little bit and make some sort of strong geometry happen. That can be really exciting. If, as you see, if you don't like a background, it's this kind of stuff that can be quite important. And it is interesting, if you've decided something's a disaster, the moment you start changing it, you should be aware right at that point it can get really nice, because all of a sudden you've let go of that kind of, and it is good, it's good. So some of this kind of texture in there, really nice. And it might be that you actually sort of retain some of that texture. And you know, these kinds of moments might be reasonably kind of unrepeatable any other way. But it's the interesting part when we first, I don't know, if we're not that experienced, we tend to sort of blast things out. So if you didn't like painting, just, you know, wipe the whole thing out. Actually, it's at this point that you start getting some really nice stuff. So look, I'm probably a couple of minutes away. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if are we still...
We've just got one camera that's been dropping out, so we've got it, but we just...
there's...
No problem.
It's all good.
Yeah. Next call. All right.
Need to change my water.
Yeah.
Amazing how that...
Let me do it for you.
We're trying, Nick. So look, this sort of story, you can see with these other ones, I've just chosen the background as being kind of, I've let a lot of the background colour come through, so I've already introduced colour. That solid colour is actually quite nice, and I'm sort of, obviously this is my now third painting. I'm a little bit kind of scared of doing too much action in the background, to tell you the truth. But I'm going to, it is, and look, I'm going to actually just sort of let it ride for a second. But it's kind of interesting about what the painting becomes about. Obviously, look, we're pretty sort of front on our drawing. You know, we had to get rolling, but you know, it could be kind of another type of drawing. I actually think a bigger painting would be a little bit better.
And what do you do if you're doing a larger one and you've got that baking paper, which is a limited size, you can still join it together or something?
Sorry, the
baking paper.
Oh no, I've got a big roll of it. That was just a...
Why?
Yeah, I'm sorry, that was just a crinkly little section I brought in. Pardon me for that. Yeah, look, it was a...
Not what you buy at the supermarket.
I know. Usually at your art store you can get 3 weights of baking paper, 3 weights of tracing paper,
Okay.
and
different widths.
different widths, and it's all good stuff. So Nick, we're not looking terribly like you. It's going to take a little bit more time to get the exact likeness of you. These where I've had like far more hours. I'm basically looking at Look, the joy for us too is that I framed this paper. I mean, I put the paper in, so when you actually see what this is, there's a nice kind of clean mark that goes from there. And it is nice to have those sorts of frames within the frame, that kind of clean line within a work. And it is actually quite interesting to even, I guess, mark off the painting, but to mark off, kind of paper and then gesso the paper is quite an exciting kind of idea. It gets us, a really clean kind of, result. But look, the works on paper just have another fluidity to them. There's just a speed to the mark that's quite nice. And again, these are much more, aren't they, from your shoulder? Much more, the marks are much more from down here. I kind of want to stand back, but I don't want to go out of shot,
Out of shot,
I know where you go.
They know where I am. I'm back here. So look, if anything, we're just a little bit busy, and it might be that I'd start to calm down his shirt. You can see perhaps with this one, the tonality of the shirt's pretty close, like dark to light. The lights within a dark shirt are very dark, basically, but they're enough to make it not busy is the word. So it's not too active. So to get rid of busyness, glazing is the solution often. It knocks back all the tone down to a similar tone. That's a solution. So this could be glazed, in other words, pushed back so it's not too jumpy. My background is possibly where the painting could be a little more, resolved. And just looking obviously at these two studies here with the slight background colour coming through, again, they are fairly uniform, aren't they? So they set the head up. So maybe that's, the lesson to learn, is to actually just basically, really solid backgrounds that make it easy to see your painting. Look, they're harder too sometimes when they're on the tilt. Look, we have started. So in the hour and a half or whatever it's been, we've started, or the hour. In other words, these are probably a 3 to 4 hour painting to get up to a level. You don't want to finish your first study halfway through. You want to get up to a certain point where you can leave it. So you want to get up to a study point where you go, actually, that's okay. I can come back. I know what I'm thinking. So next time I see, the sitter, we can talk.
Oh, look, there's a nice new brush for you. Oh, it's a present.
Look, yes, and look, as I can say to you, this is much more about kind of artist, practice than actually kind of finishing a portrait to Archibald standard at this point. We've just started the process. I've got completely, filthy and, having, an excellent time. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you to Michael and of course Nick who set this up. Thank you. A pleasure. Has anyone asked you a question?
Plenty of questions. It's been tough. Nick's fielded some answers there. Fielded a few.
Oh, you